We are presenting the Dresden War Museum. So the key components of the annex is the shape, the wedge shape that Libeskind built. It is made out of 200 tons of steel, concrete, and glass. He designed it to be transparent, and this is achieved by arranging the metal in a lamellar pattern. It resembles the pattern of a thin membrane found in the human body, specifically the bones. This allows you to see through parts of the wedge that protrude from the building. It allows light to enter the exhibits located inside of the wedge, and the light penetrates 28 feet down into the foyer of the older building it was constructed into. This floods the room with natural light and gives visitors a beautiful view of the old city of Dresden. So as you can see on the right side, that is under construction, and you can see the frame of the pattern. So his intent. In the original commission, the thought was to create a structure that furthered people's questions around the efficacy of war and the past. The wedge slices through the old building. This differentiates between the past and present conceptions and thoughts of war. The combination of the old building of an arsenal built to house weapons for war and the wedge, a representation of cutting through the past tragedies to a better future, show the horrible past of war and encourages people to question it and come up with how to move on from the trauma that it has caused. So the museum was constructed of two different styles of architecture. The first section was built in the original arsenal. The original arsenal was built in neoclassical style from the 1870s. It was originally built in 1877 and acted as an arsenal for the German armed forces. It is a very geometrical building with strict pillar patterns, which creates the repeating horizontal wings. The more recent addition, the wedge, is more modern architectural style. It is made from materials like concrete and glass. The wedge also creates a new approach to visiting and touring the museum. There's an option for a chronological tour, which is organized by dates in the wings of the old building, and then there's a themed tour, which is in the wedge. The themed tour takes the visitor on an emotional journey of war and the immediate and long-term effects it has on people. When you go to different floors and sections of the wedge, it presents stories and artifacts as well as topics such as politics and war and fashion during the war. So the wedge can be considered more of a sculpture than a building. The shape interrupts the symmetry found in the original building. Compared to the original building, which follows the neoclassical style, as said, the wedge is abrupt and violent. The original intent for the design was to show visitors this emotion of war, how it's violent, how it's vicious. It interrupts the lives of innocent civilians and creates a long-lasting impact. The triangular shape of the wedge also represents the shape that was created when German forces bombed the city. It implements real-life events into the building that represents the history of war within Dresden and Germany. So the direction of the wedge also serves a deeper purpose. Both the shape and the direction have meanings that relate to the effects of World War II on Dresden. The wedge points to the southwest direction. This represents the location of where the German armed forces bombed the city of Dresden. The viewing deck in the wedge is located at the high point, and it's a space for reflection as it points into the direction of the bombing sites.
Old and new building comparison. The addition of Libeskind structure to the former Dresden arsenal completely altered its original purpose to reflect the harm and destruction war had caused Dresden, Germany, and most of Europe. This wedge-like structure not only altered and redefined the building's purpose, it also became a symbol of the effects of war. The abrasive and violent gesture of the structure completely juxtaposes the classical style of the original building, just like the violence and destruction war can cause has done to the peace of everyday life. To the left, you can see the original Dresden War Museum pre-annexation. It's a very classical style. And in the right, you can see the post-annexation and how this wedge-like structure just completely interrupts the original style of the building. Libeskind's intent, architecture. Daniel Libeskind's design of the annexation was powerful in both its symbolism and ability to completely alter the original design. The wedge-like structure has a directionality that points towards the city of Dresden, a focal point within the tour because of its own historical significance. The symbolism of the annexation is fulfilled through its architecture because its shape and location appears as a violent gesture that is, quote unquote, interrupting the building. The characteristics of the structure and how it interacts with the original buildings reflect the nature of war and how it can also interrupt peace. To the left, you can see a model of the Dresden War Museum. You can see how the wedge has become like an integrated part of the building. And to the right, you can see an aerial view of the completed building and how the concept of a structure that builds upon another is fulfilled. Leibskin's intent, technology. Daniel Leibskin designed the annexation with a dual intention of symbolism as well as functionality. The structure has not only created a new branch within the museum itself, but an additional perspective for visitors. Within the original building, there is a more traditional style tour of chronological events, and the annexation provides a breakaway into a new perspective of a more conceptual and reflective tour. The central message of the secondary tour is the battle between love and hate. With multiple floors, visitors explore how war impacts humanity, not only physically, but emotionally and mentally. Leibskin's edition serves as a metaphor for war in both the interior and on the exterior. It enhances the overall experience and meaning of the building's purpose as a historical war museum. To the left, you can see a section cut of the annexation. It has multiple floors, and these floors are obviously designed to enhance the tour and to further enhance the message of love and hate and to provide people with an alternative perspective of this historical museum. And to the right, you can see how the exterior also gives that, can also help further Leibskin's intent. The materiality is also another component that helps to contribute to his message. Leibskin's intent, materiality. Daniel Leibskin's intention in creating the annexation was prompted by the historical events that occurred in Dresden, Germany, and how the former arsenal is a part of that history. An alternative interpretation of Leibskin's addition to the building is that it resembles the weapons and military equipment once held in the former arsenal. The prominent use of steel and concrete within the structure resembled the industrial style of military equipment, which juxtaposes the classical style of the original building, thus emphasizing further his intention of the structural metaphor. In addition to this, the use of glass allows visitors to view Dresden directly as if it were an exhibition of its own. To the left, you can see the interior view of the Dresden War Museum, the annexation, and the materiality actually allows people to look through, and part of the conceptual tour is the view of the city of Dresden and how that has become like an exhibit of its own, and how people can look at it and realize that this is real places and real people who are affected. And to the right, you can see an exterior view and how the juxtaposition between the materiality further emphasizes Leibskin's message. The significance of transparency in the annex. The annexation interrupted the original flow of the building and created a secondary tour for the historical museum, a tour that was based on thematic events throughout history, such as the battle between love and hate. The separation between the two perspectives of a traditional tour and a more conceptual tour allow visitors to reflect on how these events impact humanity. The transparency of the annex is crucial to the message of love and hate because it gives visitors a direct view of the city of Dresden, a city bombed in 1945, and the recaps of real human tragedies that happened there to emphasize the reflective nature of the tour. So to your left, you can actually see a historical photo of Dresden post-World War II and the destruction and the inhumanity that happened there. This is actually exactly what Leibskin intended, where he wanted people to really remember that this is real places and real people who are affected. And to your right, you can see that this model shows a directionality and how it has a purpose in pointing towards the city itself.
Okay, so to give some background on German history in order to better understand the purposes of the museum, on January 18th, 1871, the German Empire was founded as a result of success in the Persian Wars. In its beginning, Germany occupied over 200,000 square miles with a population of over 41 million. As far as religion went in the population, it was made up of 63% Protestant, 36% Roman Catholic, and 1% Jewish. So in its beginning, Germany was governed using a constitution which was made by Otto von Bismarck. This constitution could be seen as a reflection of the rural nature in 1867 of Germany through its predominantly authoritarian nature. Much of Germany changed after World War I, specifically because of the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, where Germany had to give up land and pay reparations. In the years after the war, much of the government changed, including their new Chancellor, Adolf Hitler, coming into power in 1933, and World War II from 1939 to 1945, which completely changed the government of Germany and the architecture of most of its cities due to the devastation of war, which included one of the worst bombings, which was in Dresden. After this, Germany had to do a lot of rebuilding for many years to come, which included a change in the form of their country, such as the split and later reunification of East and West Germany, and in later years, a change to a representative democracy. On the picture in the left, you can actually see some of the people who were fighting in the war, and in the picture of the right, you can see the changes in the German Empire. Okay, so some history on Dresden, Germany specifically. Previous to World War II, Dresden, Germany was known as the Florence of the Elbe because of its beauty in architecture and art. However, all this changed in 1945 when it was nearly completely destroyed by bombing raids. Once the smoke had cleared, much of the city was obliterated and about 25,000 civilians had died. Afterwards, most of the city had to be reconstructed, and with that came many rather more plain modern buildings, as well as an attempt to maintain much of the character of the city, which it previously had. Much of the heart of Dresden was preserved, which included this group of churches in the South Bank. Although the churches in the area suffered greatly during the war, some of them were restored and some of them were reconstructed. Others were actually kept as historical buildings. Many of the other buildings were restored after the war to be museums instead of their original intentions. And the pictures, they show the before and after of Dresden, Germany, before the bombings happened and then almost directly after. Okay, and to talk a little bit about what the museum was before the annex even happened. The history of the official German Armed Forces Museum has been one that has been seeing many faces since the beginning, since its beginning. It started out as an armory, and then a Nazi military museum, and a Soviet and East German museum. The concept of the building has changed through the years as the social changes occur, and has been demonstrated, and the building has served as a demonstration of military in Germany throughout history, and many of the events, many of the political positions for about 135 years. Finally, in 1989, the museum closed once Germany reunified because of the history it held, and it needed a redesign in order to keep going in the future. It wasn't until 2001 that feelings towards the museum shifted, and there was a competition held to redesign the museum in order to shift the views of visitors towards war and its meaning. Okay, and now to talk about the new annex. Daniel Libeskind, his intent with the annex was to fully change and disrupt the view of war and its history. He wanted to provide an intellectual and emotional focus toward the history, which previously wasn't there. The point of the annex was to disrupt the entire structure and symmetry of the building, which was rigid and opaque, with this gigantic wedge, which was transparent and open. This shift in the structure of the building represents a shift in Germany as a whole and leaving the authoritarian history in the past. In the interior of the wedge, visitors can stand inside and see the beauty of Dresden as it is today. However, the exterior of the wedge actually physically points towards the site of the bombs. The columned area of the museum demonstrates the military history of Germany in chronological order, and the wedge actually disrupts the structure by being an open space, which gives consideration to the influence that society and the impulsivity of humans has on the violent culture of war. It goes further than simply demonstrating uniforms and weapons and shows the passion, fear, courage, and every emotion in between, which comes along with war. And to the left, you can actually see one of Lipskin's architectural drawings of the annex. And then to the right, it is a section, it's a model of the north-south section of the museum. Okay, the separation of space created by the annex. Everything about the spaces in the museum, from the sizes to their shape to what to their use, actually demonstrates a sharp contrast between the traditional concept of war and the more analytical and emotional ones. Lipskin's architecture is meant to create these spaces which urge you to wander into them and feel the itinerary created by them. In the annex, when a visitor moves up the stairs toward the top of the museum, they're drawn in, enchanted through a feeling of journeying towards something. Once they get there, they are standing up. They're standing, getting a view of the city and everything that it is now, while right behind them, there's what the city used to be, and evidence of the destruction in World War II, including the ruins which were left behind. The entirety of the architecture, including the spaces, what materials they are made of, and the hardness or opacity conveys a commentary in of its own on the view of war and its history. To the left, you can see a section drawing of when the annex was being created. And to the right, it's a view of what you see if you're standing in the annex.